Good afternoon and welcome to Invest in Incredible's presentation of fundraising strategies in turbulent times. My name is Betsy Steiner and I'm the Director of Invest in Incredible here at Gulf Coast Community Foundation. Before I introduce our speaker, Amy Sankas, I'd like to make sure you know about the offerings we have available for our nonprofit community during this unusual time of the COVID pandemic. First of all, we've launched I3Digital, and it has three components for our nonprofit community. First, we have links to articles, nonprofit resources, and official government websites that address the current and evolving needs of our nonprofits. In addition, we have webinars live, like the one you're going to experience today, and others that have also been recorded. They address recent legislation, finance, fundraising, and a variety of topics to support the people in and around your organization, including staff, board, and donors. In fact, this time next week, we'll be offering a live webinar on grant writing. And currently we have our most recent edition is on returning to work and providing and creating a safe work environment. The third component of I3Digital here at Gulf Coast Community Foundation is our consulting. In addition to delivering the traditional consulting that many of you are aware of and engaged in, we also are doing short sessions so that we can address the questions or unique opportunities or even challenges that you're facing in this unique environment. These services are provided at no cost to you. They are underwritten by Gulf Coast Community Foundation. To access any of these resources, please visit I3Digital at gulfcoastcf.org, and you'll see that information available again at the end of the presentation. Just a couple things to know about our webinar today. You may submit questions throughout the presentation. Amy will be pausing occasionally to take your questions. To do that, simply use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. You can just click and submit a question. And like I said, Amy will stop throughout the presentation and even at the end to take your questions. If you happen to get disconnected or have to leave for a moment or two, you should be able to resume the webinar just by using the link that you used originally to sign on. So I'm pleased to produce Amy Sankas. She's one of our I3 consultants and a fundraising professional. She has over 15 years of fundraising experience. And in fact, one of the highlights of her career was serving as a senior director of development at the Ringling Museum of Art, part of Florida State University and their foundation. Amy knows how to create, inspire, and maintain donor loyalty. She can be found when she's not busy working with her consulting clients. She's busy chasing after her 3 children and volunteering for the Junior League of Sarasota and Selby Gardens. So with that, Amy, we're grateful for your leadership on this topic today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Betsy, and to Gulf Coast. You probably noticed that the Gulf Coast sign is right behind me, and that means I'm actually sitting here at the office, and I'm so excited to be able to do that. Everyone's social distancing, there's only a few people here, but it means that I'm out of the house and I'm in a quiet environment where I can focus, and I am so excited to be able to focus with you, all of you that are joining today. This is, anybody who knows me knows that this is one of my favorite topics, is talking about fundraising. It has been a very interesting time that we're in, so I'm grateful to have been able to research and interview some other fundraisers, not only locally, but elsewhere, and just try to put together some ideas for organizations that are looking for them. I've spent quite a bit of time on Zoom calls, which I'm sure many of you who are on this one have been on a lot of Zoom calls as well. It's actually been very helpful, honestly. I've been able to see more people than I normally would. I would normally do phone calls instead of, or in-person meetings, and you can do more when technology does get introduced. So this is a very unparalleled time. However, you know, there are some positive things coming out of it. And if I can help you today come up with a few strategies or inspire you to look at your database a little bit differently, and any board that's worked with me knows that I do love to focus on how to make the ask and how to talk to donors about supporting your organization. So I'm going to share with you my philosophy on how to do that and how to do it in a very comfortable way, and also engaging your board members to do the same. So with that, again, as Betsy mentioned, you're welcome to ask questions. I will do my best to answer them, and I have also offered to do a follow-up written response for anything that we don't have time to get to today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and start through our session. Okay, so the agenda today is really, these are kind of my key components. First and foremost, there's been quite a conversation, not only locally, but nationally, about whether or not this is the time to stop fundraising or to stop asking people for money. And I am here to tell you 110%, it is not the time to stop fundraising. In fact, this is the time to be very focused on fundraising. However, it does have to be done in a very sensitive, thoughtful, and truly meaningful way. So this is a great time to connect with those donors who are still able to give you support, and for you to be able to engage them in ways that, again, not through events, we're not going to events, so how do we engage them differently? But again, I can't say it strongly enough, this is not the time to stop fundraising. We have to be able to raise money for our nonprofits. We are so blessed to be in a community that has foundations that support the nonprofits through this time. I know there's been some relief funds set up, that grants have gone out, but it's not enough to just sustain an organization. And some of the clients that I've been working with recently have really experienced that. And so it's finding ways to communicate in a meaningful and thoughtful way, but not to stop fundraising. So what does this mean for us? It means that we have to get creative. And if anybody's been following some of the nonprofit forums or the nonprofit news, you'll see that people have gotten very, very creative. Spark is one of them that I'm not sure if they're on the call today or not, but I interviewed them because they were one of the first ones to do a virtual gala. Now I'm going to get the date wrong, but I think it was like right around March 20th when everything was shutting down, and they really had to really position themselves and pivot the entire organization differently. They were able to still reach their fundraising goal, but it was through a virtual gala. And again, during a time that they were nervous about how people would receive it. They did it in a very thoughtful, meaningful way, and they were able to accomplish their goal. And they know that I might have given them a shout out today. They spent a lot of time on the phone chatting with me about what that looks like. So they're a great example. Other organizations that are getting creative, your constituents and who you serve, depending on what kind of nonprofit you are, the needs of those constituents may have completely changed overnight. And so how do you as an organization continue to be able to meet the needs of your constituents or the community at large without being able to be in a physical brick and mortar building? And an organization that's doing a great job of that, as an example I will give, is Girls Inc. They're doing virtual tutoring instead of in-person tutoring. They're partnering with other organizations to make sure that their constituents have food, and in partnership with other organizations like All Face, like Boys and Girls Club. So they're getting creative in a way that they didn't have to do before. And their fundraising has actually gone incredibly well because, again, they're being able to meet the needs of their constituents, and they're communicating it in a creative way, which is reaching donors and having donors see the tangibles that are being served is what is motivating them to give. And so adapting right now while also focusing on those key constituents and the core mission, that's where the focus needs to be. And then using proven strategies. I don't know how many fundraisers are on this phone call, but I am gonna go over some of the basics And I'm also going to give anybody who doesn't have a full-time fundraising person on staff, I hope if you're an ED or if you're CEO, CFO, whoever it is on the call, I want to go over some of the basics because the proven strategies are proven because they work. And being able to kind of narrow down where the focus needs to be on some of those strategies is what I'm hoping to help inspire you to do. And then lastly, I really want to see that people have a mentality of being a bridge with their donors, and then to be able to ask. I've actually been doing a lot of role playing with nonprofits and boards about how to make the ask in a way that is meaningful and in a way that doesn't seem like you're just asking for money. And that might sound funny from a fundraiser, but anybody who's worked with me knows you shouldn't feel like you're asking somebody for money. You should be asking them to help invest in what you're doing. So as I already mentioned, this is not the time to stop fundraising. But, you know, I've listened to a few other, you know, forums and podcasts about this very subject. I think the number one ground rule that I would advise anybody who's in this particular situation is to lead with hope and positivity. There has been some campaigns out there that have been led from fear, and some that are very negative, and also some that have basically stated how much money they're losing and how they need support because they're losing X amount of dollars, you know, a day, a month, whatever it may be. Those are not motivators for donors. So I really want to make sure if you have a communications team, or if you have a communications staff person, if you have a marketing / communications person, make sure that they're on page, because fundraising and communication, I used to say this all the time, they have to be one and of the same. Every person that you're communicating to inside and outside of your organization are potential constituents or supporters or prospects. So the communication that has to occur needs to be sensitive, it needs to be focused, and it needs to be on par with what you're asking them to do. Are you doing a call to action, asking them to support you? What is your case for support? You know, maybe this is the time for your board to have a Zoom call and really strengthen and adapt your message. Or again, if you're pivoting and now you're serving the needs of your constituents, what are the tangibles of what that means? How many people are you reaching? You know, what is it? What is the why that you're asking them to support? And if donors can have those tangibles and understand that they've been able to feed, like one of the campaigns I just saw, I thought this was great. This was in Tampa Bay. It's their food bank, and it's give $13. That will feed 13 people, and that 13 will be matched by 13 from a donor. So $13, $13. So your $13 will feed 26 people. That is a tangible that it stuck with me when I saw the campaign. That's really clever. So again, giving people the why, and $13 is not a big ask. And I understand that some of you on this call probably need to raise a lot more than that, but it's a clever way to give someone a tangible and a way to kind of wrap their brains around the why. How many people am I reaching? How is my gift going to make a difference? And here's the other thing, folks. Support needs to be earned and certainly not expected. I recently saw a post on social media about organizations that had not thanked donors that had contributed. Whew, this is not the time to do that. Again, going back to hope and positivity, people want to understand what their gift is doing to make a difference. And if they're not being thanked, even if it's just an email, you know, even the PTO at my children's school, they did handwritten notes to anybody who made a donation during a time that events have been, you know, canceled. That is very meaningful. It's thoughtful, and it's something that you can do with assigning or, you know, delegating out to volunteers or to your board. But it's certainly something that should not be overlooked. Support, especially right now, needs to be earned, not expected. And then anybody who's worked with me also hears me talk about this. You need to focus on those people that are what I like to call in your belly. And I'm going to use that term throughout this presentation. And what I mean by that is the number one supporter to your organization is the most likely number one supporter is somebody who's already supported you. So they're already in your belly. They already understand what you do, they understand your mission, and they want to come back and support you if you give them those tangible, meaningful reasons to do so. So I like to, help organizations kind of whittle down who's in your belly. Let's prioritize who we're talking to and how they're being communicated with. And when you do that, you create those strategies, those internal strategies of now you understand who you need to be talking to, why, and if they're going to be a supporter again, continuously. It's the 7 I's in fundraising. It's getting them involved, invested, and you continue to move them up the 7 I's. If you don't know what that is, write it down. If anyone wants me to do a follow-up sheet of what that is, I have a great pyramid document that I show the 7 I's. And the whole point is the more you involve, the more you inform, the more you get someone interested, the higher the level of the investment goes. And so Betsy helped me remember that if anybody wants to see that document, or they can Google it. But it's the 7 I's, and we want to get them to the top of the pyramid. So focus on the people in your belly. Betsy, do you want me to pause and see if there's any questions at this time?
We don't have any questions at this time, so I'll just remind everyone to use the Q&A button. For most of you, it will be at the bottom of your screen, but you're doing great, Amy, and I made the note about the 7 I's.
Okay. Thank you so much. By the way, anybody who doesn't know Betsy, she's a rock star. We just adore her. So with that, I'll just keep going. So virtual is where it's at. I'm sure everyone in this call, unless you've been under a rock, the word virtual has been used an awful lot. But it is hopefully for the short term. I know that I personally am a very extroverted person. I certainly miss my engagements. And I know that there's donors and prospects out there that are missing theirs. And so we have to get creative. Moving to an online format, if it makes sense for your organization. And again, I'm happy to consult on a short-term basis if Betsy needs me to on what that means. But if it makes sense for your organization, we want to see fundraisers, EDs, or if they're volunteer fundraisers for an organization, we want to see them doing the best ROI for their time. So meaning that whatever you are going to do, we have to do it again. It's going to be right for your organization, and it's going to help get you to the goals that you have in front of you right now. Some organizations have do not have endowments, and they have an operating budget that needs to be met. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping that everyone here has thought about what that could look like for them. I've already mentioned Spark and Girls Inc. Let me talk about Healthy Start. Healthy Start has really had to pivot again to meet the needs of their constituents. What does that mean? Well, typically they would be providing diapers and wipes and formula, and in this time, it hasn't been an easy process to do that. And so the executive director has actually created in her own garage, basically a donation drop-off location, but also a pickup. And so she can still meet the needs of the community. And as they are hearing stories about people that are bringing babies into this world in unstable homes or in situations that honestly, they were very heartbreaking for me to hear, newborn babies that had their twins that had no pack and play, and Healthy Start, I should say no safe place to sleep. And so Healthy Start came up with a solution to provide them with 2 pack and plays. But then they learned that they're in a trailer that has no air conditioning, no fans. well, even if it is a safe place for them to sleep, it's not sustainable through the summer. And so they've had to meet the needs of people that are in situations like that. Donors, when they hear stories in that manner, that is a call to action to support them. Sharing the stories of your constituents that you're helping is, again, going to be a motivator. It needs to be transparent, it needs to be real, and it needs to be honest and truly a call to action. There's also kind of, so that's locally. I wanted to kind of give you some examples locally of what people are doing. But then if anybody just puts in a Google search for fundraising during COVID, there's a whole bunch of different things that, you know, AFP has put out, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, that Philanthropy Now has put out, that the Lilly School has put out. So, you know, I would encourage you to Google what's kind of out there. Some of the things that I've seen, and in my resource guide at the end of this session, you'll see an organization that's doing a great job helping, well, it's a platform that's helping organizations called Classy. But the San Francisco Ballet, they have done some really interesting things using tangibles and on their website to explain the need, and then doing a become a fundraiser like team approach. And so I don't have time to get into all of it today, but I would encourage you to Google it and kind of take a look at what that is. But there are virtual team fundraisers going on to support organizations, because obviously nobody can go to the ballet right now. And how do you continue to support an organization that can't have performances? I know this morning on our local Suncoast View, Joey Panic and Linda were talking about the arts and how, you know, the arts are definitely one of them that I think anybody in my position, any fundraiser, is concerned, because if you don't have performances or subscriptions keeping up, how do you continue to meet the needs? And I would encourage anyone to kind of look at what the San Francisco Ballet is doing, because it's pretty innovative. And then the fundraising, you know, anybody who's on a board, unless you really love fundraising, like I do, this is always a scary term. But the reason I wanted to introduce this concept, or just kind of go over it, is because, you know, as I said in one of my first slides, this is the time to be incredibly thoughtful and sensitive. And I mean, I know people who have lost their job and they're in no position to give to an organization right now. And so being able to be a friend, and I would say even friendly fundraiser, and asking, if you are asking your board to help you be a fundraiser, make sure that they're not asking people that they know are not in a position to support. Again, this goes back to knowing who's in your belly, you know, what is a thoughtful way to do that. And you know, some people, like I've joked with my husband, if we only owned a glove company, you know, how many gloves are being ordered and used, but we don't. And you know, some people's businesses have actually taken off and are doing really well, and other people have nearly lost everything, or are really just, you know, squeaking by. And I'm not here to lecture you on that, but you know, I guess I just wanted to make sure that if you are engaging your board members to be fundraisers, you know, truly rely on it, make sure it's honest and thoughtful. Betsy, do you want me to go ahead and see if there's any questions at this time?
I think you're good to keep going, although we did have a question about how, and you might be getting into this in a moment, but how you engage your board members even though they are operating remotely as well. So if you have time now or later, because I know you've got more to cover.
Yes, thank you. I will cover that. It is part of the presentation. So whoever asked that, thank you for doing that. Okay, and so I don't want to hammer this point too hard home, but again, virtually, here's some other ideas if you are trying to engage donors in a different way. Maybe think about doing an executive director update that's on Zoom, and only, you know, a certain number of people get invited to that, and it's a private but very focused, let's hear from the director in a meaningful way to those donors. The criteria for that can be a number of different things. But again, knowing who's in your belly, and if somebody is really missing that kind of direct access to your leadership, or it could be a program update. It could be, what's being planned for next year. And so making donors feel engaged in a special way might be a really good thing. Right now, we're not doing, the private donor updates that we would maybe normally be doing towards the end of season. And you can do a number of them, and it could be different focuses if you know what your donors, interests are. Another thing that I've been seeing in terms of like trends is supporting a virtual table. So if you did have to cancel a gala or an event, I know that there's a lot of organizations that have pushed their events to the fall, October and November specifically. But we still don't know what that's going to look like, do we? We don't even know what school's going to look like. We don't know what the season's going to look like next year. So creating virtual tables and doing virtual paddle raises is something that's actually happening right now. And again, I don't have time to get into all of those things, but if you, are curious and you think, that's interesting, is that right for us? Google it or reach back out on I3 email and we can, talk further. Another creative idea that I've seen is that people are doing hikes, walks, and runs, and you can even do virtual swags, like emailing them bibs that get printed at home and they wear it, they take pictures of it and they send it and they still do their own, we don't really have a lot of hiking here in Sarasota, maybe the celery fields, but you understand the point that these are, the virtual swag bags are actually something that's been kind of interesting. Or you could do, if you have the budget, you could have, for some of your sponsors or supporters, actual swag bags that just get mailed. And again, it could be, anything that doesn't have to be super cost prohibitive. It could be, a handwritten note from a board member with, with the bib in the bag. It shouldn't cost too much to mail that. But again, coming up with creative ways to still let people know that you care about them and how they can virtually support you. That has been something that has actually taken off. Another thing, and I will tell you personally, my husband donated to an organization that did something like this, where it was a virtual, do you want to see me shave my head? If you do, make a donation. I'm going to shave my head at 7 p.m. on a Facebook Live video. And obviously, I would never shave my head for this, but some of the men who are not getting haircuts right now, it worked. And he personally was able to raise over $6,000 for an organization. So if you had people that could come up with things in that area as well. And then I have seen where some people are willing to dye their hair gray temporarily to raise awareness about like Alzheimer's or other challenges. So I would encourage you, if you haven't as a nonprofit looked into some of these ideas, there's some great examples out there. Again, knowing what's going to work for you and your constituents, that's and what's going to get people, again, going back to the transparency and what's going to motivate them to support you. What's the why?
Amy, if I can jump in for a moment,
Yeah.
we have a question. One of our
Sure.
participants would like to know, how important is it to have a social media presence?
That's a great question. Just writing it down, sorry. That's a great question. I would really encourage any nonprofit that can have a social media presence to really do it, because people are home, they're on their phones, TV ratings are up, Facebook screen time is up, Instagram viewing is up. Those platforms are, they have eyeballs. And right now, if you are trying to raise money or raise awareness or engage people, you got to go where the eyeballs are, and the eyeballs are on social media. So I would say at this point in time, it is really important. And again, if you're a smaller nonprofit that doesn't have, a marketing department, like I know there's so many wonderful but smaller organizations, they just can't afford that. Is there a board member that would be willing? Is there somebody that, just happens to be kind of savvy with that in terms of a volunteer perspective? Is there a donor that would be willing to help? So again, it doesn't have to be, I don't want any of my advice to be cost prohibitive. I just want to make sure that, yes, right now the social media presence is very important. It's where people are looking.
And Amy, a follow-up question to that. How should people be using social media? Is it, with pictures and captions? Is it making an ask? Can you talk a little bit about the best way to use social media in addition to getting your board members or volunteers to share their stories? Couple of quick tips about that?
Sure. So I would just, keep in mind that when people do, if they're scrolling through social media, you have like 2 seconds to engage them. And so, yes, I would say photographs. But again, if you do a photograph of a client or a constituent or a program, make sure it's signed off. I'm not a lawyer, but make sure it's, that they've given permission for you to share that there's been a media release, that you can Google media releases if you need one. But then also, interviewing, what I've seen work the best during this time is having clients that are benefiting from the organization's mission to, if they're willing to give a story that can be shared. Again, it's about what is the impact, what are the tangibles, why does this matter? And then, yes, I would say definitely have a call to action back on if they have online giving or if they have a fund somewhere. How can you, if you get their attention, which there's a lot of noise out there to get people's attention, if you get their attention, then you want to capture that and then drive them to a call to action. But I will just caution any of you, and this is going to be into my next part of my presentation. Again, going back to the people in your belly should already kind of know they should know your mission and what you do, but be able to give them tangibles about why now this is the most in time to support. But I don't want anyone to be fooled that social media is going to fill the gap in terms of getting to your fundraising dollars needing to be earned. It's going to be back to that, those people in your belly, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so, yes, engaging those people through social media, having a call to action, those things are very, very important. It's not going to be enough, in my opinion. But if you get some new donors out of this, that again, you have to make sure you're thanking them, right? If you get a new donor, I'm going to talk about this in another slide, make sure then you don't take that for granted. Engage them, thank them, fold them in, get them involved, get them invested, get them, informed. And so again, like climbing them back up those 7 eyes so that you're not wasting one red cent at all, that you're getting any donor who's giving you a dollar should be engaged. If it is through social media, then you're doing a great job. But again, going back to those people that are in your belly. Does that help answer the question, Betsy?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Okay, so moving on, because I want to teach you all before we get off the call how to make an ask. Hopefully you know how to, but if you want to hear my philosophy, that's towards the end. And it's always worked for me, but everyone has their own way of doing it. But before we move on to that portion, I do want to make sure that not only do we need to think about engaging our donors differently, we really need to think about engaging the board differently. And, again, having them help you thank people is actually incredibly meaningful. So if you can delegate, if you have people that'd be willing to write thank you notes, if you have people who'd be willing to shoot an email or a message off to someone thanking them, or even making phone calls. I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea to do that. And a lot of people get nervous, to have those interactions. But if you engage your board a little bit differently and explain to them why this is so important, not one supporter in your organization should be taken for granted right now. And what does your board know that you don't? If you are trying to come up with some of these like creative ideas, engage your board. Maybe they sit on another board that you don't know about that it did something that did work. Survey them, ask them to share their ideas. Like this is a time for, true connectivity, with the board, with constituents. And so you want to make sure that you're engaging them a little bit differently. Zoom calls are not for everybody, but I know that most boards, that's what they're doing right now. They're doing Zoom, board meetings. And I would say that anybody who's in a leadership position at an organization, they should be picking up their phones and dialing their board members. And even if it's for 10, 15 minutes, to just see how they're doing. The transparency and the true genuine care right now is what is front and foremost. It should be. And that will engage them in a way that is incredibly meaningful if Zoom is not their thing. Did you acquire a new donor recently? So I've already kind of touched on this, but we just had a major online fundraising campaign locally. And again, if someone gave to your organization that is new, make sure that you're engaging them. Make sure of it. So don't lose that opportunity. Make sure that they're being thanked and appreciated. And this is where your board again can go back and help you. I believe in training all board members to be an ambassador. If you have questions on what that means, again, you can Google it or you can do a follow-up email, but training board members to be an ambassador. So meaning like wherever they go, if they're truly passionate about what you're doing and if they sit on your board, they should be hopefully sharing that information with anyone that they're talking to. It builds brand, it builds support, and it creates interest that maybe then can turn into a call to action. And here's the thing too, if you are going to do some of these creative or virtual challenges, please make sure it's the easiest way to let them share. Like give very simple but outlined information for them to be able to share. I've seen people really stumble over some of this new technology, and it can be scary for some that aren't maybe used to it or that are not, they're retired and they haven't really had to engage in this way before. So make it super easy for them to share. And then again, going back to what I talked about in the beginning, let them help you strengthen the case. It's all through stories. It's all about impact, and have them feel like what they're doing as a board member, even if they can't see you face to face, is still making an impact and why they got on your board in the first place. Hopefully they're on your board for the right reason. Betsy, any questions on this before I move forward?
We do actually.
Okay.
One of our participants would like to know how often we can ask the donors in our belly in a calendar year without sounding too needy. So how often can you ask those folks, in a year without sounding needy?
Great, that's a great question. And this, there's so many factors that go into it. I would say, at least once a year, okay? If they're in your belly, they care about you, you better be asking them at least once a year. But I would also, if it goes back to knowing your donors. And some donors like to give quarterly. Some will set up a pledge, pledge payment system where they want to send you or have things debited monthly. So I think it goes back to knowing what works for your donor. And so with this particular question, I would say it's really different for every individual, but you have to know that individual. There is, and I don't have this slide in this presentation, but there is the cycle of a donor, which is another follow-up. Betsy, if you want me to add, I can. It really needs a conversation or some Googling. Again, Google's good for all this. But you want to look at the cycle of a donor. And a cycle of a donor basically starts with engaging, right? Number one. And then it transitions to informing them, what is it the nonprofit is doing? Why do they care about our mission? How can I give them tangibles? Again, going back to the support. The ask, when you look at the cycle of a donor, the ask, everyone gets so worried about the ask. The ask is actually the very smallest part. So once you've done your job cultivating that donor, they're interested, they're informed, they're engaged with you, then you make the ask. And if you've been listening to them, share with you, and this is what I'm going to get into about the ask in a minute. it should be just a very easy conversation, in my opinion. I know not everybody feels that way, but again, I'm going to talk about the philosophy and kind of flipping the switch of, we're not here to ask for money. We're here to have people invest in what we're doing. So once you get through this little teeny tiny part of the ask, seems like it's going to be the biggest part. If the donor says yes to supporting and investing in what you're doing, then the most important work happens. The most important work comes with sharing why that gift made a difference. So it's the stewardship. It is the stewardship piece. And if you do the stewardship piece correctly, you put them, a donor goes right back into the cultivation mode. And so cultivating that donor back about like your support enabled us to do X, Y, Z. You have no idea, like we are so grateful to you for that. And we're going to continue to tell you about XYZ's, gift and the impact that it made, because you're so important to us and we are very grateful for you for that. And then if you are doing all those things properly and genuinely, again, I'm talking a little bit on, fundraising terms, but if you're doing it in a genuine process, I mean, I would say there are donors that I would ask, for gifts 4 times a year. But it depends on the level, it depends on their interest, it depends on what they're supporting. So there's not a one, encapsulated answer that I can give for that. If somebody, whoever asked that question, if you want to submit a question that you want me to answer offline later, if it's something more specific, I can. But again, it goes back to the donor, because one thing you don't want to do, and this is probably where that question came from, I would assume, is that you don't want a donor upset with you, or you don't want a donor to feel donor fatigue or like they're being taken advantage of. So you have to know your donors and you have to understand where their motivation comes from. Betsy, are we good with that?
Yeah, and actually I've got another question,
Okay.
and that is it advisable to bring up the challenges, that we organizations are facing financially because of COVID, or does it sound like an excuse?
So I think being transparent in this time is really important. But I would just urge caution on, and I don't know this person's organization, but I would just urge a little bit of caution, because donors will start to get a little bit nervous if they feel like they're throwing money to a sinking ship. So I would, here's my advice, is I would start with the positives. What are you doing to meet the needs of your constituents? Why does their support matter? What is their support going to do? And what is your strategy that goes along with that? Because obviously we know one donor can't support an entire organization. There has to be a multitude. So if there's a strategy and a plan in place, then, I would say reassuring that donor that their support is critical to this, during this time, that the impact that COVID has had has been truly, it's been, truly devastating. But in order to meet the needs of your mission and the constituents that you serve, ask them how they can help and support and invest. But, I would definitely say be transparent. I wouldn't start with that. I would start with the positive and then share with them the situation, and then ask them to invest and support so that you can continue to move your strategy and mission forward. Any more, Betsy?
No, I think it's good to carry on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so just to kind of get into this a little bit more, and I'm trying to watch my time, I've kind of already talked about these things, but here's, if you're taking notes, or, hopefully you like what I'm saying, maybe you don't, but, again, in your belly, the 90-10 rule, anybody in business, this holds true with fundraising as well. 90% of your dollars will come from 10% of your constituents. So when I work with nonprofits and I'm helping them sort of, take, like I was talking to one the other day that has like a list of 5,000 people. How do you whittle that down to come to, how do I prioritize my time, my energy, and the support that we're looking for? The 90-10 rule, that's how. Okay, if you don't have a database that allows you to do wealth screening or wealth research, that's okay. use your board, use your volunteers, kind of look at past gifts. And you know, again, and I'm going to talk about what some of these things mean on this list, but you know, keep in mind 90% of your time should be spent on those 10% of those people that will help you get the monies that you need to keep your organization afloat, moving forward, or doing bigger things. So who are they? And I can't give you the answer, but I can tell you, you need to analyze your database, or however it is that you track your donors. Again, going back to one of the main principles is you need to make sure that it's the people that you know it's going to be the people who've already supported you. So, you know, focus, have those conversations, engage them. And, you know, the old term, dial for dollars, this is the time people are dialing for dollars. We are not seeing people at events. We're not hosting our regular luncheons and galas. And, you know, so it's the phone, you know, and I've heard that this has actually been very pleasant for some fundraisers because they've actually been able to have engaging and meaningful conversations with their donors. Their donors are home too. And they might be lonely. I know I was joking with the receptionist here at Gulf Coast, like, I get so excited when I get to see somebody because I'm chatty Cathy. You know, I'm so excited to have like an engagement. I think the donors feel the same way, and fundraisers that have been, you know, having conversations with them, they're finding out that that's holding true for them as well. Again, tangibles, I'm trying to watch my time here for all of you, but give those tangible things. And if you don't know what they are, you know, this is where your program support or your ED, or if you are the ED, like think about the tangibles that you want to communicate. How many people did you serve last week? How much did it cost for you to serve them? You know, can you break that down and be able to say to a donor, if only you could help me, you know, with $1,000, not only, but you know what I mean? If that's what they can give, be able to respond and say to them, if that is what your gift is, if you're willing to give 1,000, I want you to know that that's going to enable us to do X, Y, Z. And I can't tell you how thankful I am for that. So be ready to have those tangibles, like, you know, in your mind when you're having conversations with people. The ambassador thing I've already talked about. Let's talk about live bunts and side bunts. Again, this is a fundraising term. You can probably Google it, but I'll tell you what it means. I've talked to some of my clients about this. So live bunt is a last year, but not this year. A side bunt is some years, but not this year. So if you're looking to kind of dig up new prospects, if you feel like you've gone to the well and you've already, you know, sort of sourced those donors that you can rely on, and you're looking to figure out who else have I not talked to, see if you're a database person, or again, if you don't have that, see if your database will allow you to run a list like this. And you want to sort that list, highest donation to lowest donation, or do a cumulative giving report that shows you gifts that were either live bunt, so like they gave last year, but they didn't give this year. Might be worth your time to do, you know, 5 calls a week to a live bunt and see why they haven't supported, or, you know, just see if you can get them on the phone, or see if a board member knows them to try to re-engage. I will tell you, the #1 reason people do not give is because either 1, they weren't thanked properly, or 2, they weren't asked again. So if, for example, if you had a board member who filled a table at an event, and one of their people, they know, oh, okay, well, they're hosting me for an event, that's lovely, I'm gonna make a donation. And then there was no real big follow-up. This happened to me in the fall. I went to an event that someone invited me to. I made a donation. I never heard from the organization again. Okay, so there's an opportunity there to either re-engage, or, you know, get them to at least open up why. And even if you do, it's just like customer service. People, if you ever have a customer service issue and you call a customer service line and you finally get that person who then like listens to you, and then you're like, okay, I'm not so mad at Lowe's anymore for sending me the wrong light bulbs. I don't know, just trying to give an example. I love Lowe's, so that's not a knock on them, but you know, customer service is customer service for a reason. And so if you have a live bunt or a side bunt, some years, but not this year, you know, why? You know, should you put together, maybe if your list is long in that, by the way, then there's a gap in something going on with your communication. If the list is short, is there a special communication that you can do? You know, is there a way that you can have your board review that list and kind of look at like, who have we not talked to in a while or seen for a while? And then again, be thoughtful and be sensitive, because we don't want to go after a donor that can't support right now. So we have to be careful with that list. But I guarantee you, if you pull a list like that, it will help give additional opportunities for you and your board to look at why are these donors, why have we not seen, you know, these donors come back, and is there an opportunity to re-engage? I also really encourage you, I didn't put this on here, but I encourage you to pull a list in your database, again, if you can, of cumulative giving, and do it over a series of years. Like, let's say I want to pull the cumulative giving for the last 5 years, sort it by highest to lowest, and take a look. Some of the best donors that I ended up discovering in lists like that would make a donation of like 20 bucks, you know, a month. But when you look at the cumulative giving, you know, it really added up. And then you start talking, thank you for supporting me. You know, I noticed that you're making a donation 4 times a year, or you did make a donation 4 times a year. I wanted to introduce myself, you know, and have a conversation like, we're so grateful for your support. And thank you for your support, and get them in, again, the 7 I's, get them involved, informed, and move them up the pyramid to get to that level of, you know, your best donors. So those are just a few tricks and tips if you have the ability with the database to kind of pull some creative lists. You know, again, if you were supposed to have an event this spring and that event didn't happen, pull a list of the people who attended that event for the past 5 years. Is there a creative paddle raise? Is there a creative, you know, virtual event that you can do with them? So those are just a few pieces of my advice to try to pivot, you know, what's happening. Betsy, any questions on that? It's a lot. There was a lot of fundraising lingo.
Amy, I think we're good. You've answered a couple of the questions that came up. You've actually just answered, so we're good. You can carry on.
Awesome, because I know we have 7 minutes, so I'm trying to be careful. Okay, one of my favorite charts, y'all, is the Giving USA chart. And I would encourage you to, first of all, the 3 organizations that you see on the bottom of this are great resources for anybody who's in fundraising. Giving USA, the Giving Institute, and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. If I were to go to college all over, that's where I would go, but I had no idea I was going to be in the world of philanthropy till I was just in it. But anyways, incredible resources right there. So why does this matter? Why does this matter? And if you're in fundraising and have not seen this chart, I encourage you to go on Giving USA and actually pull this chart from 2016 and 17. Actually, I would do the trends. I would do 15, 16, 17. This one's from 17. That's always about a year or two like lagging, because it's so much data that has to be like compiled and then audited. But I like to give this chart, and I wish I could show you. Can you see my arrow, Betsy? Like, okay. So, okay. I usually use like a pointer for this, everybody. So this circle right here, I like to really point this out, and then I'm going to talk about this over here as well. The contributions by source. When you look at $410 billion, that's how much money that was given during the 2017. Foundations saw an increase, if you see this over here too, increased by 15% in 2017. That's, I'm not going to get into all this, but that's due to just some of the tax law changes. So people did, you know, open up donor advised funds, and they put money into private foundations. So there was definitely an increase that's due to some of the tax laws. But going back down here, when you look at 410 billion, okay, this part of this mustard yellow color, every board member needs to hear this and have this visual, in my opinion. 70% of all of that giving, okay, is by individuals. And you'll see that it actually went up 5.2%. When you look at giving by foundations, we saw a 6% increase. That's probably a little bit of the lag time for people putting in, you know, for over here. But still, giving by foundations, and they do lump like foundations in this category can be anything from family to community. So that's a little deceiving, but if you still look, it's 16%, pretty good chunk. Giving by bequest. So these are people who've done estate planning, and that went up a little bit, 9%. And then here's the number one thing: when boards say, well, why isn't Coca-Cola supporting us, or why isn't we need to get more corporate money, or we need more grant money from corporations? Yeah, those things are important, okay? But I really beg of you to have in your mind the perspective that only 5% of giving, still a good chunk, but 5% of giving is through corporate dollars. Bequests are individuals, right? 9%, they're still individuals. 70% is individuals. So right there, if you add these two numbers, you're at 79%. With foundations and with corporate, you still sort of need to know someone. It's not as direct in terms of being an individual, but if you get my drift, let's just call it 80% to be conservative. 80% of all of that giving is my individuals. So when I told you that 90-10 rule, 90-10, 90-10, 90% of your time should be on 10% of the people that care about what you're doing. And the reason I say that is because if you look at it, this is where the money comes from. I also like to point out over here, 31% comes from, is through religion. And that's a big chunk. And if you think about it, part of the reason that is so high is because, not during this time, but usually people are going to their synagogue or their church or whatever religion they are, and they're asked every week to support, right? Pass the plate, donate. There's a reason why the religion is the number one on this list. It's because they ask, and they ask often. And so that is really important just from a mindset perspective. 14% is education. I like to always say that, like, no matter where you move, your university will find you and send you the annual appeal letter, right? They find you. They are the 800-pound gorilla behind the top, source here. And then everything else, which is probably who I'm on the phone with, this is what you're competing with for those dollars. But if we focus on the 90%, the 10%, that's going to give us almost that 80% of our money, 90% of our money. That's where the focus needs to be. So I really like to always break this chart down. And I'm going to move on, but if anybody has questions on that, feel free to follow up. But it's something that I think every board member should see and understand. So now, how do you make the ask? Of course, now we have 3 minutes left, so your pencils better be, or pens better be, writing quick. I'm not going to stay on this slide too much, but again, I'm going to go back to, it's about focus, knowing what you're doing to support and meet the needs, but again, using transparency with that. Having that trust in the ethical standpoint, which is also just incredibly as important. So my philosophy on making the ask is this. And I used to train my staff like this, and any board I've worked with, I talk to them about this. If you feel like you're asking somebody for money, like actual dollars, and it feels uncomfortable, either A, you're not the person to be doing it, or B, you're not at the right point in the relationship with that person to be asking them. So make sure it feels right. Make sure that cultivation, the cycle of the donor, has been done properly, and understand where their motivation comes from to support you. Give the tangibles of why their support will matter, okay? And obviously communicate it. This is the number one thing. Focus on those people in your belly. So when I make an ask, and it's been a while because now I just help train people to do it, but I have asked to help other organizations. It should just be a conversation. And I did this with Betsy last week. What I've always said is, if I know that I'm in the right place with that donor, and I'm at the point where I know what their interests are, here's where you become the bridge. You have to be certain of their interests. Okay, maybe it is still general support because they care so much about what you do, but make sure the ask is correct so that you're finding out their interests, and you become the person who just builds the bridge between the organization's needs and the donor's interest and level of motivation and interest. So you actually become the bridge between those two. The way that I would do an ask, and I'll give you an example that's different, every time. Again, know your donor. But I would say something like, Betsy, I know that you've been such a great supporter of ours, and you really care about our organization, and that has come through time and time again with the donations that you've made through the years. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for your support during this time, because you do care about this organization. And I'm really excited that you're willing to have this call with me, or the Zoom meeting, or whatever it is, because we're not having lunch. But I really am going to ask for, X amount of dollars to support this initiative, or this, just the organization in general, unrestricted monies. In order for us to continue serving the people that we're serving, I'm hoping that you will, join us and invest in us to continue to do that work. And here's the most important thing. You gotta zip it. And, I was trained to count to 10 in my head after making an ask, because if that person maybe wasn't expecting it at that moment, but you already know that they're interested and that they're motivated to support you, you have to close your mouth and wait for them to, sort of think about it, think about how they're going to say it. And if they come back and say, you know what, Amy, I'm actually not in a position right now to support you, I always tell organizations that's not a no, that's just a not right now. And even if someone has said, no, I can't do it, think about thoughtfully, going back to one of the questions earlier, when would be the right time? Like, do you want to reach out to me? What's our plan? Because I know you care about the work that we're doing, and I understand your position, and I really appreciate you just being open and honest, and I will do the same for you. So you want to let me know, or do you want me to have a follow-up with you and, in a few months? I just want to continue to share the good work that we're doing, and, appreciate you being, open to this conversation. So if you fundraise, in my perspective, that's my philosophy. You are the bridge between the organization's needs and the donor's interest and motivation to give. You do those things correctly, and when it happens, it's really beautiful, and the donors are excited because they feel like they've been heard, and that they're seeing things be accomplished that they clearly care about. So, any questions on that?
Amy, we're good with questions, and there have been so many great questions that we're actually at 3 o'clock. So why don't you go ahead and wrap up, and then I just want to make sure people know that, because we've had some questions about people being able to view this at a later time, and it will be posted on our website under I3Digital. So you go ahead and wrap up, and I just want to say a quick thank you to you, Amy, and to everyone who's participated, because we've had some great learning here, and great questions. So go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, so just my wrap up is, I left some resources here. There have been a lot of questions about, people wanting to update their estate plans. So that is something that I would encourage you. I did give a link here for Philanthropy Daily, 6 tips if you want to start your own if you don't have one, because one thing this has kind of force people to do is think about their own legacy and their life. And so if you have somebody who's interested in leaving you an estate gift, don't overlook that. There's simple ways to be able to pull that up. I also offered USF has like a great little gift planning toolkit, and it kind of gives an example of what information you would need to be able to give as an organization. I'm not an attorney, but we have some really awesome attorneys here in town that can also be a support if you don't have an attorney on your board. That certainly would be a strategy I'd recommend if you're looking to start an estate planning, society or legacy society. Classy Blog is the other one I mentioned that the San Francisco Ballet was using, and they have some really creative platforms. I'm sure most organizations are not interested in taking on another vendor right now that they have to pay, but I think, if you can afford it, great. If you can't, I would still follow their blog and kind of see if you can emulate or recreate some of the things that they've been helping, and there's some creative ones on there. And then again, the art of the ask. I do a much bigger seminar about the ask. But, going back to that philosophy of it is an art, but it should just feel like a conversation. You shouldn't feel like you're asking for money. You really are, if you're doing your job right, you're asking people to invest in the work that you're doing. And I hope I've inspired you all to get out there and do that. So if there's any further questions, send them to Betsy. Otherwise, thank you all so much.
Amy, thank you for a great presentation on fundraising strategies for all times as well as during COVID. We'll put the next slide up so that if people do want to put any questions forth for Amy, or if you're in need of any consulting support, please feel free to reach out to us at i3@gulfcoastcf.org. And with that, Amy, thanks for a great session. And we'll be seeing you all again, if not in person, certainly virtually. Everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.